1. Close your eyes. You're standing at the heart of the greatest empire the world had ever known. The air is thick with the scent of olive oil and stone dust, of roasted grain and sun-warmed marble. You hear sandals scuffing polished streets, carts rattling over cobblestones, distant conversations in Latin and Greek. This is Rome, imperial Rome, not in decline, not yet cracked by chaos, but at its very peak. A civilization so vast, so organized, so confident in its permanence that it built cities to last millennia. The year is sometime in the 2nd century CE. Rome stretches from the windswept moors of Britannia to the golden deserts of Egypt, from the Atlantic coast of Hispania to the lush valleys beyond the Danube. 50 to 70 million people live within its borders. Nearly 1/5 of the planet's population is Roman, and tonight we'll walk among them. But not as generals or emperors, not as names remembered in textbooks. No. Tonight we walk as people, shopkeepers, scribes, housewives, bakers, soldiers, children, slaves. Those whose footprints wore down the stones, those who carried water, harvested grain, cleaned amphorae, lit candles, kissed their children goodnight. The real life of Rome was not only war and conquest, it was routine, rhythm, and breath. Let's begin at the center, the Forum Romanum. It's just after dawn, the skies painted soft lavender, and the streets are waking. Vendors unpack goods beneath towering porticos. Bakers sling fresh loaves onto stone counters, their ovens still glowing from the night's fire. Senators in white togas pass under arches, their steps measured, accompanied by scribes or clients whispering in their ears. The air is alive with movement, business, gossip, trade. Above it all rises the Temple of Saturn, columns tall and proud, its steps worn smooth by generations of devotion. Children dart between stalls, chasing stray dogs. Perfumed noblewomen ride in litters carried by sturdy slaves. A retired centurion with a limp leans on a cane, muttering greetings to passers-by who pretend not to hear. A boy recites lines from Virgil's Aeneid, while his tutor listens with half an ear. A barber sharpens his blade in a shaded alley. Laundry flutters from high windows. Everything hums with life. The city of Rome, Caput Mundi, the head of the world, is noisy, crowded, vibrant. It is also dangerous. Fires are frequent, sewers overflow, crime festers in shadows, but the people endure. They build, they laugh, they argue, they worship. Rome may be a machine of empire, but it's also a collection of homes, of faces, of fleeting ordinary moments. Walk a little farther, and you'll find the aqueducts. Arched and eternal, they snake across the hills like stone serpents, delivering fresh water to 1 million people. The engineering is staggering, dozens of miles of careful gradient, carried over valleys, through tunnels, into public fountains and private baths. Rome is not only mighty, it is practical. Clean water is a luxury that even some modern cities struggle to provide. Here it gushes freely from lion-headed spouts and marble basins. Children splash in it. Old women fill buckets. Bakers mix it with flour. Follow the water and you'll arrive at the baths of Caracalla, vast and echoing. The stone floors are warm beneath your feet. The steam clings to your skin. The sound of dripping water and quiet voices surrounds you. Men recline on benches, discussing politics or poetry. Attendants rub scented oil into tired backs. In one corner, 2 boys wrestle. In another, a philosopher lectures to anyone who will listen. This is not just a bathhouse. It is a temple to the body, the mind, and the shared ritual of daily Roman life. And when evening falls, torches flicker to life. The smell of grilled fish and lentils rises from kitchens. Music drifts from wine shops. Shadows lengthen over tiled roofs and columned courtyards. Somewhere a mother hushes her baby to sleep. Somewhere else a poet scribbles verse onto a wax tablet. Somewhere farther still, a slave dreams of freedom beneath a woven blanket. This is the world we will explore tonight, not through the lens of glory or tragedy, but through quiet observation. What did it mean to live in a city built to rule the world? What did people eat, believe, love, fear? What was it like to walk those streets, to feel the heat of the stones under your sandals, to hear Latin echo from marble walls? What did it feel like to be Roman, not in legend, but in truth? We will go behind the marble facades, into kitchens, bedrooms, taverns, shrines, into lives both magnificent and mundane, because history is not only battles and emperors, it is also laundry, gossip, prayers, and bread. So lie back, let your mind drift like incense in a temple. Let the sounds of Rome rise around you, the rustle of linen, the clang of coin, the quiet laughter beneath the stars, and let us begin. Now that we've wandered the marbled streets and bustling heart of Rome, let's slip into the quiet rhythm of daily life. Not the grand public rituals of empire, but the intimate, almost invisible motions that shaped a citizen's day. A Roman morning began not with alarm clocks, but with the soft crowing of roosters and the distant clatter of wagons arriving at the market. Light filtered through shuttered windows. The first scents of bread wafted from bakeries tucked along narrow alleyways. Housewives stirred embers back to life and fetched water from stone fountains. Children, still drowsy, were gently nudged awake. For the wealthy, mornings unfolded in spacious atriums filled with light and echo. Servants bustled about, laying out togas, preparing breakfast platters, perhaps bread, honey, olives, or goat cheese. For the poor, life began in cramped, creaking insulae. Apartment blocks packed high with tenants and tension. Fires were risky here, so many relied on street vendors for hot food. The smell of boiled lentils or fried chickpeas might mingle with laundry hung overhead. Education was valued. Boys from about 7 years of age would head off with wax tablets in hand to learn grammar, logic, and rhetoric, skills vital for anyone aspiring to civic life. Girls remained at home, their days filled with spinning wool, grinding grain, or helping prepare meals. It was a divided world where one's path was largely set by birth and rarely crossed the invisible lines drawn between social classes. Religion, too, was woven into every hour. At tiny household shrines, Lararia, Romans paused to light incense or murmur prayers to the household spirits, the Lares and Penates. Public festivals were common, with parades of garlanded animals and flutes echoing down the streets. Temples were busy places, both for sacrifice and for business, as deals were struck beneath colonnades while priests recited rites in the background. Work began early. Shopkeepers raised wooden shutters and laid out wares: pottery, wool, figs, sandals. The city buzzed with craftsmen, cobblers, butchers, scribes, perfumers. Public scribes, perched on stools at street corners, offered their services to the illiterate, writing letters, reading contracts, even composing love poems. Labourers hauled bricks. Couriers darted between offices. Water carriers sloshed through crowds with clay jars balanced on shoulders. Even slaves had their routines. They swept courtyards, tended gardens, carried messages, or accompanied their masters on errands. Some were tutors or physicians. Others toiled in kitchens or fields, rarely glimpsing the world beyond their assigned walls. A slave might be born in a far-off province and end his days in a Roman cellar. But even so, some rose to positions of trust, even wealth. Lunch, called prandium, was light: a quick bite, cold meat, fruit, a handful of nuts. For the rich, it was an interlude before more formal dining later. For others, it was eaten on the go, crouched in doorways or on shaded steps. Taverns, or popinae, served stews, wine, and gossip. Here, workers rubbed shoulders with soldiers, traders, and the occasional out-of-favour noble, nursing his pride and a cheap cup of Falernian. The Roman city never truly rested. Streets were alive with entertainers, flute players, storytellers, acrobats. Magistrates passed in litters, escorted by guards. Beggars reached out from corners, children wove between legs, and cats prowled for scraps. And always there were laws, posted on bronze plaques, shouted in forums, whispered in courts. A tangle of rights, duties, taxes, and rituals governed daily life. A citizen could sue his neighbour over a property line, or be fined for wearing the wrong colour toga. During a funeral, public shaming, exile, even execution, these were part of the Roman rhythm, as ordinary as a mid-morning bath. Women had their own sphere. Though barred from politics, many wielded influence at home and through family alliances. A clever matron might manage an estate, oversee slaves, arrange marriages, and maintain her husband's reputation, all while navigating the complex code of Roman modesty and virtue. Her jewelry might be modest, her tunic pure, but her thoughts sharp as any senator's. As the sun climbed higher, the heat thickened and shutters closed. Siesta hours took hold. The city paused. Only the poor and desperate remained in the streets. Evening, though, revived the city. The wealthy hosted cena, lavish dinners lasting hours. Reclining on couches, guests dipped into olives, dormice, honeyed wine, roast peacock. Conversation was as important as food: politics, poetry, scandal. Music played, dancers spun. The lower classes might eat boiled beans, flatbread, onions, but they too told stories, played dice, sang. And when darkness fell, oil lamps flickered on. The streets echoed with footsteps, dogs barking, the distant murmur of fountains. Lovers whispered under arches, philosophers debated by torchlight. A city wound down, not to silence, but to softness. This was life in Rome at its peak, layered, structured, intimate, and vast. Not a golden age of marble, but of people. 303. At the peak of its grandeur, the Roman Empire was more than sprawling roads and shining temples. It was a carefully engineered machine of power, upheld by institutions and soldiers, rituals and hierarchy. And tonight, we step beyond the noise of the markets and the bustle of the baths into the quieter corridors of command. Rome prided itself on being a republic, at least in name. But by the height of the empire, that label had become more tradition than truth. The Senate, once the heart of Roman political life, now stood as a ceremonial echo, a body of elderly men in white togas, advising an emperor who rarely needed their advice. Still, their presence mattered. It cloaked the empire's rule in the dignity of old customs, and gave the illusion that power still flowed from the people. The Senate had once been Rome's compass. Composed of aristocrats known as patricians, it managed foreign policy, declared wars, and controlled the treasury. Now, its laws served more to endorse imperial decisions than to challenge them, and yet, even in its decline, it remained a symbol of continuity, a thread stretching back to the founding of Rome itself. The emperor, Imperator Augustus Caesar, was the true center of gravity. He held supreme military command, judicial authority, and religious oversight. From the grand halls of the Domus Augustana, he ruled through decrees, edicts, and appearances. His word could reshape provinces, pardon criminals, or consecrate new gods, but even emperors were not immune to fear. Conspiracies simmered, poisonings were whispered about in marble corridors, assassins waited with daggers behind smiles. To wear the purple was to carry both glory and dread. The imperial court was its own world. Bureaucrats, freedmen, noble families, and ambitious upstarts vied for favor in a delicate game of influence. One misplaced word, one unflattering rumor, could banish a man to the cold edges of the empire, or worse. But to rise, to be named consul, governor, or praetorian prefect, that was power carved from silence and strategy. Meanwhile, the engine that kept it all intact was the Roman military. Legions, 12 to 20 at any given time, each one a disciplined unit of around 5,000 men. Bricklayers, archers, engineers, scouts, medics. They wore not just armor, but identity. A soldier's allegiance was tattooed on his hand, his pay recorded on wax tablets locked in camp chests. These were not citizen militias. They were professionals, trained to march 20 miles in a day, build a fort by nightfall, and fight in perfect formation at dawn. Every legion was divided into centuries, 80-man units led by centurions with scarred faces and voices rough as gravel. These commanders were often veterans who had earned their post not through birth, but battle. Their vine staffs could discipline as quickly as direct, and their loyalty to Rome was absolute. Soldiers came from across the empire, from the Alps to Numidia, from Gaul to Syria. Many were not Roman citizens at all when they joined, but Rome promised something in return: land, money, and citizenship after service. And so they marched. They guarded borders, built roads, enforced laws. They dug ditches and raised walls, sometimes faster than enemies could knock them down. Rome's roads stretched like veins from its heart, carrying troops to distant wars and returning them as hardened veterans or silent ashes. Fortresses lined frontiers, the limes, dotted with watchtowers and gates. Every stone laid by a Roman hand was a quiet declaration: we are here, and we intend to stay. But war was not constant. Much of Rome's military might was about deterrence. The mere presence of an eagle-topped standard could calm rebellions or cow distant kings. Soldiers, when not campaigning, lived in barracks near towns. They married local women, raised children, planted olive trees. The empire spread not just by conquest, but by settlement, by routine, by the slow, steady rhythm of life lived in Roman boots. Alongside the legions were auxiliaries, non-citizen troops who brought special skills: archery from the east, cavalry from the German forests, slingers from the Balearics. They fought fiercely, often for a chance at Roman citizenship. Their loyalty was tested in fire and often proved unshakable. Military triumphs were celebrated in grand processions through Rome. Trumpets blaring, prisoners bound in chains, wagons piled with gold and ivory. But not every victory led to a parade. Many soldiers died far from home, buried beneath crude stones, inscribed with worn Latin. Their names faded, but their labor built the empire. Rome's strength lay not only in its legions or its law, but in its ability to weave order from chaos, to turn marshes into roads, frontiers into provinces, and strangers into citizens. It conquered not just land, but the hearts and habits of those it ruled. And behind it all stood a system, imperfect, sometimes brutal, but astoundingly durable. So tonight, as you lie beneath your modern roof, imagine the rustle of a crimson cloak, the clang of armor, the quiet tension in a Senate hall. Think of a centurion watching the northern skies, a senator plotting his speech, a baker's son marching east toward glory or death. The Roman Empire at its height was not a myth. It was real. It was built one coin, one law, one soldier at a time, and now we continue forward, toward temples, taverns, and triumphs yet to come. Survano 2.5 Sanofa. As the empire stretched its arms across continents, Rome's heart pulsed not only with soldiers and senators, but with faith, spectacle, and sound. Religion, art, and entertainment were not afterthoughts. They were woven into the fabric of Roman identity. Tonight, we step into that world of gods, festivals, and roaring crowds. In every Roman home, even the humblest, there was a small shrine, a lararium, where daily offerings were made to the household spirits. A flick of incense, a whisper to the lares and penates, asking for protection, fertility, good harvests. These weren't grand imperial rituals. These were the quiet devotions of morning and meal, the rituals that gave shape to ordinary days. But Rome was never content with the small. The city swelled with temples, massive structures crowned with marble gods, Jupiter, king of the pantheon, towered over the Capitoline Hill. Venus smiled from shaded altars. Mars brooded over legions far from home. Festivals in their honor spilled into the streets. Torches lit the night. Garlands fluttered. Sacrificial smoke curled into the sky. Whole days were devoted to celebration. Some, like Saturnalia, turned the world upside down. Masters served slaves, gifts were exchanged, and laughter echoed through homes. Religion was not merely private or sacred. It was political. Every major public decision was accompanied by augury, interpretations of bird flights, animal entrails, and omens. Priests or pontifices served as intermediaries between Rome and its divine guardians. To neglect a ritual to offend a god was to risk famine, plague, or defeat. And then there were the emperors, not only rulers of men, but eventually gods themselves. After death, or even before, some were declared divine. Altars were raised, statues unveiled. The imperial cult became a tool of unity across the provinces. To swear loyalty to the emperor was to join the Roman world. In temples from Spain to Syria, people lit incense to the genius of Caesar. But Rome was more than incense and prayer. It was thunder and applause. Entertainment pulsed through the empire like blood through veins. In every town there were amphitheaters, theaters, circuses, spaces designed for the spectacle of human triumph and tragedy. The greatest of these stood at the heart of the capital, the Colosseum, a wonder of engineering, a symbol of power, a monument to both brutality and pageantry. 50,000 people could fill its tiers, from senators in shaded boxes to peasants perched on stone benches. When the gates opened, the roar was deafening. Gladiators clashed in choreographed carnage. Exotic animals, lions, elephants, leopards, emerged from underground cages. Sometimes entire naval battles were reenacted. The arena flooded to become a shimmering sea. Gladiators were both slaves and celebrities. Trained in special schools, they fought for freedom, for fame, or simply for survival. Some died quickly, others, like Spartacus, became legends. The crowd played judge, thumbs up, thumbs down, lives hanging in the balance of applause. Not all games were bloodied. At the Circus Maximus, chariot races drew even larger crowds. 4 teams, red, white, blue, green, competed in dangerous loops around a central spina. Horses thundered, wheels splintered, and fans bet fortunes on their favorites. It was Rome's version of football. Politics and theater rolled into one. Theaters offered a different thrill. Comedies, tragedies, political satire. Some plays mocked emperors, cloaked in myth and metaphor. Audiences jeered, laughed, wept. Drama was not confined to palaces. It lived in the voices of actors, in masks held aloft, in lines shouted beneath open skies. And as the sun set, Rome did not sleep. Musicians strummed lutes in taverns. Acrobats performed in torchlight. Poets recited verse in candlelit salons. In villas, banquets stretched into the night. Wine flowed, riddles were exchanged, dancers spun. The elite discussed philosophy, astronomy, dreams. The poor told jokes, shared bread, leaned close. All this, religion, entertainment, art, was more than distraction. It was cohesion, a way to bind millions under one identity. A Gallic farmer, an Egyptian merchant, a Roman senator, they could all cheer at a race, honor Jupiter, laugh at a play. This shared culture, this emotional glue, kept the empire whole even as it stretched thin. But not everyone belonged. Jews, Christians, foreign cults, they worshipped differently, resisted assimilation. At times they were tolerated, at others persecuted. The early Christians in particular faced suspicion. Refusing to sacrifice to the emperor was seen as treason. Many were imprisoned, some executed, a few crucified or fed to beasts under Colosseum arches. Their quiet faith would one day change the empire, but in these early days it was a dangerous path. Yet even as tension brewed, Rome endured. It absorbed influences, Egyptian deities, Persian mysteries, Greek philosophy. The pantheon expanded, temples changed hands. What mattered most was not orthodoxy, but ritual, public unity, appearances, and behind the pageantry, real people. A priest fumbling through a rite, worried he forgot a line. A gladiator whispering a prayer before battle. A child laughing as colored ribbons fluttered during a festival. A merchant carving Venus into a coin. These were the souls of Rome, not just statues and slogans, but beating hearts. So, as the night deepens and you drift beneath the stars, imagine the flicker of torchlight across marble, the chorus of a play echoing through a plaza, the low hum of a prayer whispered in Latin. Rome, at its most alive, was not just an empire of power, but of meaning, of myth, of memory. And tomorrow we continue. In Seminar 255, behind Rome's marble columns and military might lay a more personal empire, one made of flesh, names, obligations, and identities. To live in Rome meant more than just being alive. It meant knowing your place. And tonight we walk the layered tiers of that ancient society, from the shadows of slavery to the privileges of citizenship. At the top stood the elite, senators, equestrians, magistrates, generals. These were the movers of men and money, draped in fine togas with purple stripes, their homes adorned with statues and libraries. Their children studied rhetoric, philosophy, and law. Marriages were arranged to bind wealth to influence. Life for them was one of banquet halls, political scheming, and carefully guarded reputations. Beneath them, a broader swath of citizens, plebeians, bakers, farmers, soldiers, craftsmen. They paid taxes, served in legions, voted in assemblies. Their lives were neither luxurious nor desperate. They lived in apartments called insulae, crowded, multi-storied, often dangerous. Fires were common. Collapse was a fear. But still they were free. They had rights. They had names passed to children. Then came the freedmen, once slaves, now released. Their former masters often became their patrons, and ties of obligation remained. Freedmen could marry, own property, run businesses. Some grew wealthy, even influential. But a stain remained, a whisper of past servitude that no wealth could fully wash away. And at the bottom, slaves, not always chained or beaten, but owned, property. They came from war, debt, or birth. Some worked fields under open sun. Others poured wine in villas, taught children, wrote poems, even managed estates. A slave could be everything to a household, confidant, nurse, clerk. Yet they were also expendable, a legal category, not a person. Some slaves were branded. Others wore collars with inscriptions, "Hold me if I flee." Their fate rested on the temperament of their master. A kind home could mean relative peace. A cruel one, despair. Runaways faced whipping, torture, or crucifixion. Yet even in bondage there was hope. Slaves could be manumitted, freed through loyalty, payment, or age. Some saved wages, peculium, to buy freedom. Some were granted it in wills. To be free was to be reborn, to step into the world with a name, a status, and sometimes a small coin stamped with liberty's image. Women's roles, meanwhile, cut across classes in unique ways. A noblewoman could command wealth, estates, and servants, but her life was shaped by marriage, motherhood, and propriety. She couldn't vote or hold office, but she could influence, quietly. A matron's word could sway a husband or guide a son's ambition. Working-class women labored as midwives, shopkeepers, weavers, innkeepers. Some served as priestesses, particularly in cults like that of Vesta, where chastity was sacred and political power unspoken. These Vestal virgins guarded Rome's eternal flame and held privileges even senators respected. Prostitution, legal and taxed, was part of the urban fabric. Some women chose it for survival, others were coerced. Brothels stood near bathhouses, busy and brazen, but not all prostitutes were poor. Some meretrices, courtesans, lived lavishly, mingled with poets, and wielded soft power in silk-draped salons. Rome's social web was vast and intricate. Honor and dignitas mattered deeply. A man's status could rise or fall through scandal, victory, inheritance, or marriage. And beneath every interaction pulsed an awareness of hierarchy. Even names carried weight. A Roman citizen bore three: prenomen, nomen, cognomen, first name, clan name, nickname. Names linked a man to his ancestry, his house, his deeds. A freedman might adopt part of his master's name as tribute. A slave had no name, only a label until granted humanity by freedom. Civic identity mattered just as much as lineage. Being Roman meant protection under Roman law, the right to trade, marry, appeal, and serve. But Rome was flexible. It expanded citizenship over time, drawing conquered peoples into its embrace. First Italians, then Gauls, then more. By 212 CE, under Emperor Caracalla, nearly all free men in the empire were granted citizenship, a move to unify but also to increase tax revenue. This wasn't altruism. Rome knew how to use inclusion as a tool. Granting rights bred loyalty. Making outsiders insiders gave the empire durability. But not all accepted Romanization easily. Some clung to local gods, languages, customs. Rome tolerated difference, up to a point. Rebellion was crushed. Dissent, if too loud, was silenced. Assimilation was often gentle. Latin on coins, roads leading to Rome, amphitheaters in distant towns. But when gentleness failed, legions followed. And yet, through it all, life continued in ordinary rhythms. A shoemaker repaired sandals beside a stall selling figs. A mother braided her child's hair while reciting lines of Virgil. A widow lit a lamp before her lararium. A retired soldier carved an inscription on a gravestone. Not everyone was a senator. Not everyone was a slave. Most were simply Romans, living, working, aging, under the watchful eyes of gods and emperors. So tonight, as you reflect on your place in the world, consider theirs. Not as characters from history books, but as people, complicated, striving, enduring. In Rome, the boundaries of identity were real, but not always fixed. And with that, we march onward, to the streets, kitchens, and marketplaces of everyday Roman life. 0712 5.06 一确认第6段的原文长度约为对9一这位陈字符。以下是根据你之前要求的改写内容，改写段落 Part 6字符书改用抢 bathhouses 和空格。As the sun dipped behind Rome's rooftops, the city didn't go to sleep, it transformed. The clamor of business faded into the hum of evening rituals. Smoke curled from kitchens, torches flickered in the narrow streets, and homes, whether grand or humble, filled with the rhythms of daily life. To understand the empire, we must now leave the temples and forums behind and step inside the walls of Roman homes, into the world of food, family, chores, and rest. In a wealthy domus, the day ended in elegance. The central atrium, open to the sky, glowed with lamplight. Slaves bustled about, setting tables for cena, the evening meal. Cushions were fluffed, amphorae of wine uncorked. Dinner was no hurried affair, it was theatre. A typical feast might begin with olives, eggs, and honey-drenched pastries. Then came roasted meats, spiced lentils, bowls of oysters, baskets of fruit, and always wine, sometimes sweetened, often diluted, poured generously. Musicians strummed softly, dancers moved to flute songs, poets performed impromptu verses. The meal might stretch for hours, a symbol not just of appetite, but of status. In contrast, a plebeian household offered simpler comfort. A clay stove warmed flatbread and porridge, beans, cabbage, cheese, humble fare, shared around a low table. Children squabbled, grandparents recited stories of old battles and gods. Walls were thin, neighbors' voices leaked through like wind. But still, there was warmth, a candle, a bowl of stew, a roof over one's head. Life, if not luxurious, was enough. Above them, in the rickety heights of the insulae, things grew precarious. These multi-story apartments swayed in storms, creaked with age. Fires were constant threats. Sewage trickled down wooden staircases. Families shared cramped quarters, one room, sometimes two. Privacy was rare, comfort rarer still. But these insulae were also alive with colour. Vendors hawked food from carts. Children played games in the alleys. Laundry fluttered between windows. Amid poverty, people carved out joy. For slaves, the end of day didn't always mean rest. Some collapsed into straw mats after back-breaking labour in fields or kitchens. Others remained alert, tending fires, drawing baths, nursing their master's child. Yet among them, hope lingered. Some saved scraps of coin, some whispered dreams of manumission. Freedom was distant, but not impossible. Even in servitude, humanity persisted. Education shaped the structure of Roman life, especially for the elite. Boys from affluent families studied under private tutors, learning Latin, Greek, oratory, arithmetic. They recited Cicero, analyzed Virgil, debated laws of rhetoric. Girls, if taught, focused on music, needlework, and household management, skills to serve the future matron. Among the poor, education was rarer but not absent. Some children attended ludi, basic schools, learning letters scratched into wax tablets. Knowledge was a ladder. Not everyone climbed it, but many tried. Bathing was both necessity and indulgence. The thermae, public baths, were sprawling complexes open to all. For a small fee, one could pass through warm rooms, plunge into hot caldariums, then shiver into cold frigidariums. There were barbers, masseurs, libraries, gardens. Deals were struck in the steam. Gossip flowed with the water. For many Romans, the baths were more than hygiene. They were community. Markets pulsed at the core of city life. The forum buzzed with vendors shouting prices, donkeys braying, citizens haggling over olive oil or sandals. Bakers sold warm loaves. Butchers displayed cuts of goat and boar. Spices from Africa, silks from the East, clay lamps, scrolls, and charms, all exchanged hands beneath awnings that flapped in the breeze. Pickpockets worked the crowd. Children darted through the chaos. It was noisy, chaotic, human. Evenings brought moments of calm. Lamps lit, scrolls unrolled. Dice games began. Lovers whispered on balconies. Priests chanted evening prayers. In the lararium, incense curled toward household gods. Families gave thanks. They prayed for rain, for a successful birth, for safe travels. Religion wasn't always spectacle. It lived in corners, in murmurs, in routine. And in sleep there was relief. The poor curled beneath patched blankets. The rich sank into carved beds draped in linen. Soldiers lay under stars, merchants on ships, slaves on floors of storerooms. And all for a few hours shared the same dreamscape, drifting beyond Rome's boundaries into imagined peace. So as you settle into your own rest, imagine yourself in those ancient dwellings. Hear the murmur of a fountain. Taste the tang of olive oil on warm bread. Feel the cool stone beneath your feet. In every age, people end their days in the same way, with weariness, with hope, with the small rituals of quiet survival. Tomorrow we'll walk further still into the empire's borders, where the pulse of Rome met the wild unknown. But tonight we rest, sleep, as they did. Under stars, under tiles, under 1,000 dreams. Dirusaniu 2:5.7. Beyond Rome's walls, where aqueducts no longer flowed and paved. Roads gave way to dirt paths, the empire blurred into wilderness. But even in these distant edges, the provinces, fortresses, and trading outposts, Roman life pulsed. Tonight we venture into those outer realms, not the bustling heart of the empire, but the far-flung corners where Rome met the unknown, and people lived lives balanced between order and chaos. Out here, soldiers were the front line of civilization. Garrisoned in stone forts on windswept hills, they lived a life far removed from the marble baths of the capital. Daily routines were strict: drills, patrols, repairs. Between drills, men played dice, carved graffiti into stone walls, and wrote letters home in Latin scrawls. Some had wives and children in the fort, others longed for homes far away. But all shared the same rough bread, the same coarse wine, and the same sleepless nights listening for signs of barbarian raiders. Their armor wasn't always polished, their boots wore thin, winter bit through wool cloaks, and summer sun baked the stone walls. They were Rome's outstretched fingers, gripping borders, guarding peace. Alongside the legions, merchants roamed. Rugged, clever, and adaptable, they threaded through mountains, deserts, and forests, moving goods from Alexandria to Londinium. A trader might carry olive oil, pottery, or glassware, or spices, perfumes, scrolls, and fabrics. Every step brought risk: bandits, floods, corrupt officials, or even local unrest. But the rewards, coins, connections, freedom, were intoxicating. Caravans wound through dusty roads, ships braved choppy harbors, inns filled with voices speaking Latin, Greek, Celtic, Egyptian. Cultures collided. In these margins, identity was fluid. A Gaul might wear a Roman cloak, a Syrian might worship Jupiter. Borders weren't just lines, they were living zones of adaptation. In towns far from the Senate's gaze, governors ruled like kings. Justice was swift, sometimes brutal. Taxes were high, rebellion simmered. And yet Roman architecture rose: forums, theatres, baths. Latin appeared on inscriptions. Coins bore emperors' faces. Rome, even diluted, left its mark. For many, Rome's presence was both a promise and a burden. Roads brought commerce, but also legions. Temples brought religion, but also foreign gods. Some local elites embraced Roman ways, adopting togas and Latin names. Others resisted, clinging to tribal customs. The result was a strange hybrid, a Roman world with regional flavors. Women in these regions often bore unique roles. Some ran inns, managed farms, or traded goods while husbands served. Others acted as healers or midwives, crossing cultural lines. In border towns, women became cultural bridges, speaking multiple languages, raising children in blended households, and maintaining ties to both past and present. Children grew up with mixed identities. They recited Roman poets and local legends, played Roman ball games and native dances, ate bread and lentils, but also regional dishes seasoned with memories older than empire. Faith, too, mixed and morphed. The gods of Olympus met local deities in mosaics and altars. Jupiter shared space with Mithras. Isis stood beside Ceres. Christianity whispered in the shadows, gaining converts, offering hope to slaves and outcasts. In quiet gatherings by candlelight, new faiths were born from old doubts. But life on the fringe was never easy. Droughts came, trade faltered, bandits struck. An earthquake might collapse a city built too quickly. A new emperor might forget these outer provinces altogether, leaving them to local warlords or fate. Even loyal Romans felt distant, forgotten, second class. Still, people endured. A baker's oven glowed before dawn in a Gallic town. A schoolmaster taught Latin verbs in a desert outpost. A widow lit incense before her shrine. Soldiers trained, traders bargained. Children laughed. Civilization was not only sustained by emperors and marble, it was kept alive by repetition, by habit, by the quiet stubbornness of daily life. And so, as you settle under your covers tonight, think not just of Rome's grandeur, but of its edges. Think of the wind in a soldier's face on Hadrian's wall, the hush of a merchant temple in Syria, the long walk of a young girl carrying water through North Africa's dust. Rome was an empire not just of conquest, but of connection, and even as empires fall and maps change, the stories from the borders remain, etched in stone, whispered in prayers, carried in blood. Good night, traveler. Sleep soundly, as countless souls did under stars beyond the empire's reach. So the empire does not last forever. Even as Rome pulsed with order, beauty, and belief, shadows gathered, quiet, slow, but sure. And as we close this journey through imperial life, we drift into reflection, not just of cities built and borders drawn, but of what remains when an empire fades. In the 2nd century CE, Rome seemed eternal. Its roads spanned continents, its legions were feared, its laws echoed in courtrooms from Gaul to Judea. But time, like water, wears away even marble. The signs began subtly. Emperors grew erratic. Some ruled wisely, philosophers in palaces. Others ruled in terror, drunk on power. Civil wars flared, plagues crept in. The Antonine Plague, carried by soldiers, returning from campaigns, swept through cities, silencing laughter and trade. Whole families vanished, markets emptied. The baths grew quiet, taxes rose, grain grew scarce, borders bent beneath pressure. Germanic tribes, once allies and auxiliaries, grew restless. The Parthians pressed from the east. The desert winds whispered rebellion. In distant provinces, loyalty wavered. Rome's vast size, once its glory, became its burden. And yet, life continued. A potter shaped clay in Hispania, A midwife delivered a child in Ephesus. A student copied Cicero in Alexandria. The empire was not only its capital, it was its people. Their routines did not stop when senators argued or when generals plotted. They lit lamps, shared bread, whispered prayers. Even as cracks formed, Roman culture endured. Roads were still walked, laws still cited, Latin still spoken. In churches and synagogues, new beliefs emerged. Christianity, once persecuted, began to spread. In catacombs, symbols of fish and light appeared. In hushed gatherings, hymns replaced hymns to Jupiter. Some resisted change, others welcomed it. A world once ruled by swords now turned slowly towards spirit. But decline is not collapse. Even in the 3rd and 4th centuries, Rome adapted, split into east and west, fortified its borders, minted new coins, rewrote laws. The center shifted toward Constantinople, toward the future. Emperors rose and fell, armies marched. But the idea of Rome remained. And that is what matters, because Rome, in the end, is not just a place on a map or a chapter in a book. It's a system of ideas, order, citizenship, law, beauty, empire. It lives in our architecture, our alphabets, our calendars, our languages, in the streets we walk, in the governments we build, in the stories we tell. You've walked tonight through more than marble ruins. You've followed in footsteps across time, through kitchens and temples, theatres and barracks, markets and border towns. You've stood among citizens and slaves, senators and scribes, merchants and mothers. You've seen their fears, their joys, their rituals. You've listened to their world, not in lectures but in lullabies. And now, as night settles and silence returns, imagine Rome beneath the stars, the flicker of oil lamps, the hush of courtyards, the dreams of 1,000 strangers who once called themselves Roman. Their voices may be lost, but their lives, their patterns, their humanness, that remains. So sleep now, not as a scholar or a tourist, but as someone who's lived a little alongside them. Let the sound of sandals fade into silence. Let the echo of Latin prayers soften. Let the weight of empire give way to breath. The story of Rome is vast, but tonight your story is simple. You are warm, you are still, you are safe. Good night, traveller. May the empire of your dreams be gentle.